and welcome to the Diverse and Inclusive Leaders podcast. This is the show where I speak with the most inspirational and thought-provoking leaders of today and unearth their unique stories of diversity and inclusion to help inspire, educate, and motivate others to make the world a better place. Today, I'm so excited to be joined by Adonica Black. Adonica is the Global Director for Diversity, Equity and Inclusion, in addition to being an attorney, in addition to being a member of the Board of Directors at Duke University, while still managing the full-time role as LexisNexis's Director of Global Diversity, Talent Development and Inclusion. She's incredibly passionate about authenticity, amongst many other things. And I'm excited today to learn about how she came to be where she is today. Welcome, Adonica.
Thank you so much, Layla. Very excited to be here with you today.
So, Adonica, for those that don't know you as well as I do, tell us a little bit about the story, the journey, because obviously you went from doing your bachelor's in markets and management, you then became a lawyer, and the career's kind of spiraled since then, hasn't it? Did you always want to do this, and how did that happen?
Well, it's interesting you say that because my parents, and particularly my dad, always talks about my life, and he's like, it's design and divine. And so from a very young age, from about the age of 7, I always knew I wanted to be a lawyer. And I also come from an immigrant background. I was born in Kingston, Jamaica. My parents were born, however, in Brooklyn, New York, but their parents were also born in Kingston, Jamaica. So I always coined myself a first and a third generation immigrant. And so I've always had a lens of cultural fluency and inclusion and how that plays out in my own life. And then, of course, moving forward in my professional life and in my career aspirations. So all of that has come together. Wanting to be an attorney, I studied international relations in undergrad and markets and management, as you mentioned, and then moved into law school and focused on international business and international law. And then I had the chance to practice in litigation before joining LexisNexis in our business division. And so these varied experiences really have always been colored by my interest in globalization and kind of international relations and the ways in which different cultures and identities intersect in business and intersect in life. And then that has led me to my current role as Global Director of Inclusion and Diversity within LexisNexis Legal and Professional. And I think it's a great marriage of my interests and my talents and background to really bring that perspective to enhancing our culture of inclusion.
Adonica, you make it sound so easy, but clearly there is so much to unpack there. I love the way that you talk about this globalization and internationalization with the intersection in life. And, I wonder first and foremost, how did some of the personal experiences in the early days affect some of that decision-making process as you went up through the career ladder? Because now there's a lot of the keynote speaking, you found yourself, your confidence. Talk to us a little bit about the kind of the intersections of who you are as a person.
Yeah. So I think foundationally, having come from an immigrant background, though I was born in Jamaica, I moved to the United States at 2 weeks old because my mother was in medical school and had a child and then moved back to New York very quickly. So from almost birth, I've had a unique perspective on life and on culture. And I've always grown up with that lens of kind of that dual perspective and also understanding how those different identities contribute to who we are as people and who I am as a person. And I think that has always made me a very empathetic person, a person that has always thought of from different perspectives because I've just had to. And I really like that aspect of being able to understand the needs of others and translate it into constructive ways to improve and enhance all of our experiences. I'm also a big sister, so I'm the eldest of my family, and I feel like for big sisters out there, you understand what it means to kind of be like, as my sister jokes, like the manager of the group, and really having to be strategic, and make sure that resources are well allocated, people are doing what they need to do when they need to do it, and then also kind of being that overseer in all perspectives and making sure everyone is taken care of. And those things are really core to who I am as a person. And they have really helped me in my perspective with regard to my work in DEI, because I think that fundamentally is what DEI is about. We use this acronym diversity, equity, and inclusion, but it really is those individual perspectives, making sure that everyone has a sense of belonging, everyone has what they need to succeed. And we are looking at life, looking at our systems, looking at our workplace through these varied lenses. So those things for me have really created kind of who I am and my perspective and how they have contributed to my work. I'm also a cancer survivor. So I survived childhood brain cancer. So at the age of 14, I was diagnosed and had a very significant surgery and recovery. And I'm always, whenever asked about this experience, very grateful because it provided me with such perspective at like a foundational point in my life that has made me have perspective throughout life. So when I'm dealing with things that are hard or challenging in all aspects, I kind of go back to like, well, is it as hard as that? And if it's not, then it's my energizing resource to think like, okay, you can get through it. So you can keep pushing forward. And those are the kind of core values that I bring to who I am.
Adonica, thank you so much for sharing that personal story. And I think as others are listening, as I'm listening, cancer affects so many people. I think the statistics is something like 1 in 3. And so to have not only role models, but to have real models like yourself that speak from a place of power, and power through vulnerability and sharing, it gives strength to so many others. I recently lost my father to
I'm so
cancer
sorry.
under a
Sorry.
year ago, and thank you so much. And you really don't realize the profound impact of these diseases until they really hit home. And especially in this world that we were talking about kind of before the podcast started, this volatile, uncertain world that we are in, with everything from media headlines to switching on the news and seeing and feeling this kind of negativity. We need these stories of strength that really uplift others and demonstrate that power of tenacity and resilience, which frankly is one of the most important characteristics I think leaders need to survive these days.
Resilience, I think that is so key, and and when I think about kind of core values to who I am, resilience is one of those really strong themes in my life, and I think you're absolutely right because things are hard. They seem to only be getting harder, and having perspective and understanding kind of who you are authentically as a leader and being guided by that and having that resilience to understand, okay, perspective wise, what's hard versus what's really hard and what can you do versus what do you need to set aside for someone else to achieve with you. Collaborate, communicate, ask for help, ask for support. Those things all contribute to resilience, and stronger outcomes overall. So I 100% agree. And cancer patients or cancer survivors or their caretakers or loved ones can speak to that firsthand because you kind of see how that resilience plays out physically in your body. And hopefully, if you're able to recover, you see that process of recovery. And it really is a process. And for those who don't have that, recovery, they also have to live with that. So the resilience shows up in that experience, I think, throughout the experience, and provides such empathy that really sticks with individuals in other parts of life.
Mhm. Empathy and resilience is clearly something that you have in abundance, and the fact that you seem to be almost the linchpin of the family as the older sister, but you've brought that into your work, having been through so many things, which you talk of intersectionality, which I'm so pleased about, is, there's so much more to people than meets the surface. It is not just how we show up with the color of our skin, our gender, and so on, but those things that are hidden behind the surface that, really add another dimension to who we are and how we show up every single day and give back.
So true. Absolutely.
Mhm. Do you think, before moving on from kind of the, the brain cancer that you had, do you think that that impacted how you presented into the workplace? Did you look back and kind of think, oh my goodness, because I've been through that, I can go through anything?
100%. Whenever people have asked me about that experience, I always say I'm so grateful for that because my prognosis was deadly and I survived. And having that experience has given me the perspective of what's really hard, what really matters in life, what really takes all of who you are. And so when I think about challenges that I face in the workplace, um, I always take that perspective with me. I always take that level of grounding into difficult conversations, difficult opportunities or occurrences, or even things that require me to stretch what I think of my capabilities and capacity. And so having that perspective and then also being able to share that perspective with my colleagues and loved ones and helping them also kind of ground themselves in really, okay, if you're facing a deadline, is that really as hard as maybe some other things that you faced in life that are truly challenging? And I think that creates that energy source of, okay, I've done it before, I can do it again, and I can continue to succeed. And in moments where you don't, that's okay too. You have the perspective of what does failure look like and then continuing forward. So for me, I'm very grateful to have had that experience at a formative age because it is a part of kind of who I am to look at things from a lens of just perspective and also faithfulness and being true to you will get through this. You will be okay and persist and you see the results.
It's so beautiful how you talk about perspective. I've got very into stoicism of late. I have a little
Mm,
stoic coin. I'm not
really?
sure how, yes, it's, I mean, I ordered it off Amazon, albeit, but it's still a little stoic
I
coin.
love it.
And I carry it around with me. I have two actually. And one says on it, zoom out to see life as it really is. And we
Mm,
were talking there about this piece with perspective. Is it a life or death situation? It's so easy to get sucked in to the worry and the anxiety of right now, looking at the news headlines. Goodness, anyone could be feeling that. But as you say, is it a life or death situation? Let's zoom out to see things how they really are. And clearly you did just that because it was 24 years old, I think. If what I hear and see in the press is correct, that you then became an attorney. So 10 years later, from this deadly brain cancer, you go on to be an attorney. It's just such a great journey. Just such a great journey.
wow. You know what, Layla? I never actually put the numbers to it, but you're right. And that is something I'm very grateful for to think about how life can just change in ways that you may not have even imagined. And when you talk about stoicism, it really resonates with me because I also am a firm believer in just the power of your mind and how you think about things and how that affects your reality. And so, to your point, when you zoom out and have perspective and then think positively, hopefully about what's possible for you and your outcomes, that does something energetically that I think changes those outcomes. So you're right, 10 years later, being able to have graduated from law school and moving into the practice of law and really having had these experiences that I think were necessary to create a stronger person to face the challenges that I need to face in life.
Mm. I mean, that is literally 10 years worth of stoicism right there. The philosophy that you'll have had to go through that and maximize those, there's almost those positive emotions. I think, especially when you work in this world of diversity and inclusion, belonging, equity, culture, you're kind of on this emotional roller coaster. at
Mm,
times. But the mindset to succeed and to continually maintain a glass half full perspective is critical. I think to honing honing values, honing, your character as a person almost, because, and again, I'm going to sound terribly biased here, but I believe that those who work within the world of diversity, inclusion, equity, belonging, culture are some of the most tenacious individuals, because they're influencing mile wide, they're influencing mile deep. And obviously you latterly went into doing a lot of work in kind of the talent space as well. It's kind of, you start to see that play out in, the hierarchies of talent and the need to influence at such great scale, and often, with lesser budgets than the classic
yeah.
C-suite and other functions within the business world.
It's so true. And a couple of things you said there really stick out to me because I think for DEI professionals, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging professionals, and I've taken to spelling out the acronym because I think that with what professionals are facing in our current climate, it's important to put words and language to the work we're doing. So it's not just an acronym, it really is these important advancements in diversity, in equity, in inclusion, in belonging, and who could reasonably argue against that? So thinking about it from that perspective, it's hard, right? And it's not always going to be glass half full. I can't say that I am always happy every single day because it is such deep and sometimes very personal work, either for myself or for the people I'm working with. Um, but there's something there that keeps you coming back because of how personal it is and how meaningful it is when you do make some kind of incremental progress. When someone's identity is validated, when someone increases their sense of belonging and you see it in their like personhood and how they're able to just show up and feel seen and then deliver, um, that keeps filling up the cup when it may get leaky at times, using this metaphor here. Um, and I think it's just important for us professionals to support each other in that way and be that support system when one may need that lifting up, especially in the climate that we're facing where we're being challenged regularly.
Mm. I couldn't agree more. It's that power of community. The cup is very leaky at times. Whilst I did say you have to be glass half full, it is, to survive in this world with these media headlines, it is another level. And I wonder, we talk about this power of community and sticking together, which is so critical. But when times are rough, and I've had them of late, looking at saying DEI must die, I mean, honestly, it makes you want to die yourself, quite
Mm,
frankly. You just think, how and why could this be happening when, there's so many people that affects, it affects them on a deep and personal level, because, to your point that you mentioned before, they're deeply personal issues. This is systemic issues that we're dealing
mm,
with. So for one headline to dominate and be so polarizing, it just makes me want to scream sometimes.
so true. I think headline DEI must die is intended to be provocative, and it has been. And if people want to believe that, they don't have to look further. They don't have to dig deeper. And so I think as professionals, we need to be just as provocative and pushing back and evaluating what exactly are you calling for the death of and why. And if it's something that is truly morally repugnant, calling it what it is. And so I think this person, in addition to others who are basically trying to build an audience based off of how inflammatory they can be, um, need to have some pushback. And so I don't think most people would agree with inclusion must die because everyone understands wanting to be included. Everyone understands wanting to feel equitable treatment. Everyone understands the benefit of diverse perspective and diverse experiences. So that silent majority needs to become more vocal and needs to start pushing back and questioning these leaders in heavy quotation marks that create this inflammatory kind of incendiary environment that we all have to live in.
Mm. That is so powerful. And that really made me think. I've never heard anyone say it like that. Let's say those full words, because I even find myself at times trying to shorten things because I'm having to say diversity,
So much.
inclusion, belonging, equity, culture, oh, DBEC or DEI or IND. Really, when you boil it down to things, that's surface level provocation.
Yeah.
If we want to just look at the surface, as you say, then people will believe just that. Are they the target audience to actually get this runs far deeper? Let's keep saying it and put the power behind those words. Which leads me on to talking about the power of words meeting the data. I know you and I are both data geeks, could talk about this forever and a day. But when you look deeply beyond that surface level facade of the DEI must die situation, you look at these incredible figures for economic growth and prosperity. My belief, as I know yours is that diversity, inclusion, belonging, equity, and culture is an economic lever for a commercial lever for economic growth and prosperity. And by feeding back into these communities and by supporting brands that really do care, we are really feeding society and really uplifting the economy, which is more important now in times of economic strife than it ever has been. Who's going to buy a Tesla right now? Well, I'm sure many people have them, but I for sure am very glad that I do not have one because I would not be putting my money there.
That's so true. I mean, I'm sure as a shareholder, one would be quite concerned with the leader that would be willing to make such inflammatory statements with regard to the economic value of your shares. And when you think about it from that, what we call business case perspective in the profession of diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging, and you're right, it's a mouthful, but it's worth the mouthful, I guess. Um, I think it's so clear, the business case. A couple data points really stick out to me. So I recently heard a data point around the transfer of wealth that we're facing globally within the next decade. So within the next decade, we're going to be facing the largest historical transfer of wealth as kind of the baby boomer generation transfers their wealth to the millennial generation and younger. And that transfer of wealth will lead to some transfer of power in many ways because buying power will change. And that younger generation becoming more economically powerful is critical for businesses' future performance and future existence, honestly. And those younger generations absolutely make purchasing decisions based upon value systems and value statements as well as actions. So not just what have you said, but what have you done as a business. And so when I think about a business wanting to survive into the next decade, into the next millennium, businesses absolutely have to account for what are their values to their customer, and they have to have displayed that through their action. So there's just so many reasons why diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging will be a driver for continued financial and economic performance, that it's critical, and it really would be kind of irresponsible to not have a plan in place for a business that wants to succeed into the future. I think another way to look at it is when we think about emerging markets. So I did a lot of research on emerging markets in my undergraduate studies because I studied kind of Latin American emerging markets as well as East Asian emerging markets, which essentially are markets that are growing in their own financial power and GDP. So they become stronger kind of market shareholders and more influential in the global market. And when you look at the population and the demographics of those emerging markets, those are people who come from what we call traditionally diverse demographic backgrounds, right? So women, people of different ethnicities, people of different identities are becoming stronger financially. And they also are looking at what are the value systems of the resources and the custom and the companies that they choose to use their financial resources with. And we see it daily with just kind of global interactions and businesses and how culture contributes to business performance. And then one other point I want to highlight here is how we are all responsible for this culture, and for our culture, our business's culture. So one of the things I heard recently was about cultural stewardship, and it was very striking to me. I think most business members understand that if you're part of a business, you are a financial steward of the business, meaning you won't spend irresponsibly or non-compliantly, and you'll try to maximize revenue and minimize loss, minimize expenses, right? And so everyone understands their role in financial stewardship, even if you're not in the finance department of the business. And so I think that same stewardship needs to be applied to cultural stewardship in a business. Everyone is responsible for contributing to an inclusive culture, even if you're not a diversity, equity, inclusion professional within the business, because you interact in the business, you're a part of the culture, and you contribute and are responsible for it. So I think there's so many things to think about when you talk about kind of the business case for diversity. And it's just becoming a more strong case as we think about the future opportunities for growth financially.
I love that we're talking about financial wealth here, actually, because I did a 6-week course at Cambridge, which is all around the wealth economy. And when you were talking about the shift of financial power and how, ultimately we've got 5 generations in the workplace now, and that
Yes.
is just increasing. Those younger generations, they care so dearly about businesses with value and not just the surface level. But coming back to the wealth economy, it's all about how do we measure wealth beyond GDP or USD, knowledge capital, social capital, human capital.
Mm,
All of these things are far more long-term and meaningful than pure financial capital on the balance sheet. So when you talk about cultural stewardship and how we need to maximize the value of our people through engagement, actually, those are some of the historically intangibles I think people have really struggled to measure. And so organizations looking at DEI initiatives as a short-term piece are going to be in a very challenging position when we come to 2025. We come out through economic crises and we start to ramp up again. Well, 2025 is a watershed moment. Wealth economy framework, which is all about sustainable prosperity beyond GDP and USD. Things like this are being adopted by the UN in 2025, amongst the facts that the S in ESG and the various reporting metrics, investor stakeholders who are investing in ESG organizations and so on and so forth, they are increasing. So when you look below and you start to really analyze statistics, you look at all of these different models, you look at the need for businesses to minimize losses, but over the long term, it's such a short-term view to be looking at culling any initiatives around these areas, because talent will be lost, buying power and spending power will be lost within these organizations. It is such a short-term view, such a short-term view.
it's such a short-term view from that loss perspective, but also the growth perspective. Because I've seen it, where businesses have embraced these values and really allowed access for professionals to be at the table when decisions are being made that are instrumental to the business. And those professionals are able to provide that perspective that provides greater insight into an emerging market or a different way of looking at how to market something or how to develop a product. And those insights only lead to greater financial performance and gains and minimizing losses, right? So we've all seen it when businesses did not have the right people at the table and made a blunder that everyone sees and is like, how could that have happened? But it's because who's in the conversation and who's been given the opportunity to contribute meaningfully to the conversation. So I'm really hopeful that businesses will continue to see that value and elevate that value of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging professionals, because they can do so much more than just human capital or human resource related initiatives really they're great stewards of the business overall and can contribute to the overall business wellness and performance because all aspects of the business should be considering that cultural perspective.
Mhm. Oh my goodness, Adonica, I'd love to do another whole podcast about where DEI sits when it comes to HR, because you've touched on something there that I think is so, so key. These are not purely HR issues. They literally are absolutely across the piece. And engagement, and I know that won multiple awards and some really amazing things when it comes to increasing employee engagement, but through diversity and through diverse talent. But it is another whole conversation. It is just, the business case and the impact of inaction, of not doing these things is off the Richter scale.
It's
Off the
so
Richter
true.
scale.
And wherever it sits for any professional, wherever your org or function kind of sits in the business, more so that access piece, that opportunity piece, and being a part of important instrumental conversations and then opportunities and processes in the business, no matter where you sit, I think is really critical because providing that overall perspective just leads to a greater and stronger business.
Mhm. Adonica, I'm so conscious that we're running out of time and I could talk to you forever. I'd love to ask you one quick lightning round question before we wrap, if I
Sure,
may.
please.
Um, but I wonder, if you could go back in time, I know this is a classic question, but if you could go back in time and speak to the young Adonica, back perhaps, even pre-diagnosis, before you knew what the journey
Mm,
ahead might look like, what would you say to yourself and anyone else who is out there who's having struggles, who is feeling really vulnerable and wobbly because of headlines and things like that? What would you say to yourself and to others, um, to
yeah,
support?
that's a really good question. If I could go back to that like 13 or 14-year-old person who's always been driven, who's always been high achieving and also somewhat ascribing value to those achievements, I would just encourage my younger self to have less fear. I think that fear can be a good motivator, but it also can cause one to kind of reach close to achievable goals, right? So I think that one, fear is it's very real, but it's also very not because you're the only real thing you have is right now. So worrying about what's going to happen in the future really won't change that in any way. So that would be probably my one piece of advice is to just let that be quieter and just keep reaching higher.
Mhm. That's fantastic advice. Thank you so, so much. Reminds me of Eckhart Tolle, actually, and the power of now. I feel like we've gone from a lot of sorry, my dyslexia, philosophical conversations in this to kind of real hard facts. It's been absolutely tremendous. Adonica, I've loved speaking with you.
Thank you so much, Layla. I love the breadth of our conversation, and I feel like whenever I get a chance to speak with you, it does go from very deep, kind of theory of life conversations to the practicality of and tangibility of business performance and success. And I just value your perspective in all of those parts of the spectrum very much. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Adonica. I normally summarize, but I'm thinking, where on earth do I start? I will say this, that I think, the power in some of your words through your perspective on the intersections of life, the intersections with talent, perspective, stoicism, how you zoom out, in order to see life as it really is, have really kind of hit home for me. And also being so candid about the cancer as well. I know that's something that many people who are listening to the podcast, may have experienced themselves or will have family members, or colleagues who are dealing with this. Adonica's story, I just think is so incredibly inspirational and gives hope to many of us, that actually you can go through times of hardship where life really feels that it's hanging in the balance, and you absolutely can come out of the other side. And then finally, I just love this talk about the transfer of wealth. If there is not more of a compelling business case, that is it. diversity is a commercial lever for economic growth and prosperity. Let's think about that wealth of talent we have within the organizations and the fact that younger generations, millennials and beyond, that buying power, that is so powerful. So let's say this to organizations listening in: put your money where your mouth is, because people will not buy from brands that do not care. And talent, great talent like Adonica and many others, will not stay within organizations that do not place a serious, authentic emphasis on this. I hope I've summarised there, Adonica, and
Perfect.
done you justice, because there was so many things in that podcast that I could have waxed lyrical about. I had to hold myself back from talking and jumping into the conversation. My name is Leila McKenzie-Dallas. This is the Diverse and Inclusive Leaders podcast. You've been listening to the tremendous Adonica Black. If you've been affected by any of the issues, please make sure you reach out to us. You can find our podcast on Apple, Spotify, or any of your favourite podcast channels. Or go straight to our website and download at www.dialglobal.org/podcast, and we will look forward to seeing you again very soon.